Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and Michael Myers. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Halloween H20, 20 years later. This is the first hard reset we see in Michael's story, with H20 ignoring the Thorn trilogy and working as a direct sequel to Halloween 2. Laurie Strode has faked her death and taken on a new identity as Carrie Tate, living in California with her son John. She is riddled with trauma from that fateful Halloween night, but years of paranoia are finally reaffirmed when her brother returns to kill her a full 20 years later. After the mess that Part 6 became, screenwriter Daniel Farrens left the franchise, not wanting his ideas for sequels to be turned into even bigger debacles. This was just a couple years after the release of Scream, which turned the genre on its head, revitalizing slashers and spawning a million copycats. The Weinsteins and Accods wanted to get in on that action, and literally brought in Scream's screenwriter Kevin Williamson. He originally wrote the script in line with all of the sequels, but that became messy when Jamie Lee Curtis did agree to join the project. The idea of Laurie faking her death? Good. The idea of Laurie faking her death and abandoning her daughter, allowing her to be killed by Michael? Not so good. Thus, H20 was dubbed the real Halloween 3, a decision that was mostly welcome at the time, but it did leave a bad taste in the mouths of people who enjoyed the entire franchise. Curtis wanted to reunite as much of the original cast and crew as she could, including John Carpenter to direct, but he would only join the project if he got a 3-movie deal and had a $10 million starting fee, considering it lost wages from all the Halloweens that were made using his work. The Accods and the Weinsteins said fuck that. And Steve Miner, the director of Friday Part 2 and 3, House, and Warlock, took over directing. Sadly, we don't get any Laurie and Loomis, as Donald Pleasance passed away in 1995, making H20 the first Michael Myers Halloween to not feature the character. Don't worry though, we have lots of hip 90s teens to help fill that void. Laurie's son John is played by Josh Hartnett from The Faculty, Pearl Harbor, and Black Hawk Down in his feature film debut. His girlfriend Molly is played by Michelle Williams from Wendy and Lucy, Blue Valentine, and Manchester by the Sea. Laurie's boyfriend Will is played by Adam Arkin from A Serious Man, Choo Choo and the Philly Flash, and Pig. Security guard Ronnie is played by rapper and super shark killer LL Cool J, who has brought us bops like Mama Said Knock You Out. And finally, Michael is played by actor and stuntman Chris Durand, who also did stunts for Ghostface in Scream 2. H20 had a budget of $17 million, which is actually the highest budget of any Halloween movie ever, but it paid off though, as they brought in a whopping $75 million at the box office, being the highest grossing Halloween movie at that point. It was met with pretty positive reviews from critics, most of whom felt it was at least better than the Thorn trilogy. Some even dubbed it the best Halloween sequel out of all of them, but I would say that its love has diminished a bit since the 90s. It currently has a 52 and 49 on Rotten Tomatoes, indicating a step up in quality, but still only good enough for about half of its viewers. I did have H20 on DVD as a kid before I was familiar with the entire series, and I remember it pretty fondly, but adult Noah is not a fan of Scream knockoffs most of the time, so I'm interested to see how I like it. Y'all might want to hide your corkscrews, cause we're watching Halloween H20. The movie opens in Langdon, Illinois, as Mr. Sandman plays to remind us it's tied to Halloween 2. Oh snap, it's Marion Chambers! How you doing, Queen? Oh, your home got broken into? Better enlist the help of some local kids. Butterball, what you doing on that porch? They call the police, and little Joseph Gordon-Levitt can't resist checking out the house for burglars while they wait. He finds her office ransacked, snags a couple brewskis, and fucks up a pot rack when he gets spooked. It's nighttime now, I guess, and Jimmy reports his findings to Marion. She can't get the power back on and finds a big empty Laurie Strode folder. Ooh, her front door is wide open, probably due to Mr. Myers back there. Now the back door is open, and Marion has a decent idea what's up by now. She runs over to Jimmy's house, but the lad has an ice skate lodged deep into his face, and his friend Tony is standing up dead, I guess. Oh, he was probably propped up by Michael, who grabs a shiny new knife. The cops finally arrive, and Marion tries to fight back with a fire poker. Too bad they're checking out her home and can't hear her. Marion puts up a good fucking fight, but she ultimately has her throat slit by Michael. He once again snags Marion's car while the cops are distracted, and the next day we learn from detectives that Marion was caring for Sam Loomis before his death, and it was his office that was ransacked. They are skeptical Michael could be behind this, but they call up Haddonfield just in case. Too bad Mike ain't headed to Haddonfield. A slick opening credits sequence gives us a tour of Loomis's office and even gives us a rehashed version of the Doctor's iconic speech from the original. We also see Laurie has supposedly died in a car accident before entering a fancy-looking classroom belonging to headmistress Carrie Tate. We get a flashback to the closet and a knife in her son's photo, and Laurie, or Carrie I should say, wakes up screaming like a banshee. Her son John comforts her and grabs some meds from her little pharmacy. Carrie and John live in California now, where she runs a private school called Hillcrest. John gets a late birthday card from his absent father, and Carrie tells him he can't go on a class trip to Yosemite. John knows his mother's past and understands her fear, but says her paranoia and overprotection isn't helping him. She knows he is right, but that doesn't stop her from seeing Michael everywhere she goes. John tells his friends Charlie and Sarah he can't go on the trip, but turns out his girlfriend Molly can't go either for financial reasons. Charlie and Sarah didn't want to go in the first place and opt to stay at Hillcrest. Meanwhile, somewhere in California, a mother and daughter happen to stop at the wrong rest area. A locked door causes them to use the men's restroom, and the propped open door shuts when they're in the stalls. The mother's purse gets snatched, and through the stall she sees Michael look back at her. Luckily, Mike is on a mission and he has no time to kill these randos, but now he's got a vintage car. Charlie and Sarah have figured out ways to be kicked off the Yosemite trip, and the kids plan their weekend of debauchery. Guidance counselor Will is also staying back to watch over those who don't go to Yosemite. Oh wait, no, it's so he can bone Carrie. Meanwhile, security guard Ronnie is working on his steamy romance novel.
Tumultuous, round melon breasts.
Round melon, what?
His wife is unimpressed, and John and Charlie manage to persuade the weak-willed guard into letting them sneak out to prepare for their sexy dates. Laurie hallucinates Michael again, but it's just Will, and Laurie asks him if some people can be so traumatized that they never recover. She tries and fails to share her backstory with him and starts chugging some midday Chardonnay. John and Charlie are stealing some drinks of their own before being spotted by Carrie. She is not pleased, and the two get into a public screaming match. John tells her Michael Myers is dead and he wants to live a happy life, but her paranoid delusions have dragged him along for 17 years and he's done with it. You don't know how wrong you are though, Johnny boy. Michael follows them back to Hillcrest, and Ronnie gets a good scolding for sucking at his job. Molly receives some romantic instructions via a dumbwaiter that will obviously be used later, which leads to the super romantic basement setup. Very romantic. Well, as long as you lovebirds are happy. As Carrie teaches about Frankenstein, Molly takes a scene from the OG and sees Michael watching from afar. Just like Laurie, she is still able to answer a question that directly correlates to this movie's themes. Carrie has decided to take a risk and let John go to Yosemite after all, which puts a kink in his plan, but looks like he'll just be sticking around. Bye, every single unimportant character. Oh wait, we still have to say bye to Secretary Norma, played by Jamie Lee's actual mom, and classic Scream Queen Janet Leigh. The scene isn't really important, but it's hella meta and great fan service. When the background characters are away, Michael will play. He pulls up to the gate, but is gone by the time Ronnie is done reading smut to his wife. Ronnie checks out the car, and Michael slips by. I guess he's getting more docile with age. He watches Ronnie for a while, but I guess just wanders off. Carrie is closing up for the night when she sees Michael approaching her. She tries the old make him disappear method, but Mike keeps coming. Will beats him to her though, making her believe he was a hallucination after all. He plans to meet back up with her in 20 and also spots Michael in the shadows. He checks in on Molly and Sarah, giving us some more hip 90s dialogue.
Care to join us?
I can't. I'm having my nipples pierced.
Oh.
Before the teens sneak off to their sex dungeon. Carrie is downing vodka and Listerine when Will arrives with a pumpkin, and the kids are feasting on cafeteria food as Charlie goes to grab a corkscrew. Carrie and Will are making out when she finally decides to reveal her true identity. At first he thinks it's some sort of roleplay, but eventually starts listening. She gives a recap of the first 2 movies, and he's shook by the end as the Michael Myers story is apparently very well known at this point. Carrie, who I'm just going to call Lori now, realizes Michael came for her the year she turned 17, which is the age John just turned. This makes her go into a panic and she tries to call John, only to find the phones are out. She also finds John's pack, realizing he never left the campus. She grabs her pillow-side revolver and nearly puts a hole in Ronnie, who came to tell her about the car at the gate. Sarah is looking for Charlie, who sneaks up on her and hops in the dumbwaiter, still in search of a corkscrew. Dumbass drops it into the garbage disposal just in time for Mike to arrive. The garbage disposal is a red herring though, as CGI Michael has something pretty screwed up in mind. Now Michael is watching Sarah, who just thinks it's Charlie playing games, but turns out he's dead in the dumbwaiter, possibly having had his throat slit with the corkscrew. Michael cuts off her escape and her leg once as she escapes through the dumbwaiter. She gets stuck crawling out, and when Michael cuts the rope, the door slams down, crushing her leg. John and Molly hear the crash, but that won't save sitting duck Sarah, who is killed by Michael with a few cold-blooded stabs while she's pinned to the floor. John and Molly reach the kitchen where they find a big-ass blood trail, which leads them to Sarah's donut of a body hanging in a pantry. They spot Michael and book it out of there, but they stop to plan long enough for Mike to catch them. John barely stops Mike from stabbing Molly, but takes a knife to the leg himself. Molly smacks him with a rock and they keep going, but decide they need to enter this little locked gate for some reason. They lock themselves in, but Molly drops the keys as Michael catches up. Michael shows off his fruit ninja skills and eventually picks up the keys to make his way in. Luckily, they are found by Lori and Will, who let them in just in time for an epic sibling stare down. Lori grabs her piece, but Mike yeehaws out of there. Lori hides the kids away and tells them to barricade the door. Will sees what he thinks is Michael and grabs the gun and starts shooting. Bad news, Will, you shot Ronnie. Worse news, Will, Mike is stabbing you and holding you up like a prize fish. Lori sees the kids haven't stayed put, and Michael investigates the closet as well a moment later. This ain't Halloween 1 though, Mike, you can't use all of the same tricks. She reunites with John and Molly and they flee to Lori's car with Michael hot on their trail. They narrowly skirt away and reach the front gate, but Lori tells the kids to drive to the neighbors and get help while she stays behind. She smashes the button to lock them both in and arms herself with a fire axe for their final showdown. Michael comes down from a pipe like he's a goddamn xenomorph or something, and the siblings slice each other on the shoulder, with Lori losing the axe in the process. Michael enters the dining hall where Lori is American Ninja Warring beneath the tables. Mike catches onto her tomfoolery and starts slicing and throwing tables. She grabs a flagpole and gores Michael with it and runs upstairs to the kitchen. She unsuccessfully throws like 5 knives at him, but does block Michael's attack with a drawer. She gets the jump on him again and stabs her brother a ton of times, pushing him over a balcony onto another table. She heads down and pulls the knife from his chest, but before she can land a kill shot, still alive Ronnie bursts in and stops her, insisting he is dead. So obviously prepare for one more act. The police and paramedics arrive, and as Michael is bagged, Lori grabs her axe and steals a cop's gun. She steals the police van with his body, and nobody bothers following her, I guess. She watches as Mike squirms back to life, and once he's completely free, she slams on the brakes to launch it through the windshield. She waits for him to get up instead of just parking the tire on his skull or something, but she does slam on the gas, taking the both of them down a big-ass hillside. The tumble results in Michael being pinned between the van and a tree, and the somehow unharmed Lori grabs her handy-dandy axe. Michael feels around the mask and reaches out to Lori, which will sadly make more sense in the next movie, and they have a little creation of Adam moment. The movie ends abruptly with Lori chopping Michael's head clean off as the police finally catch up in the distance. And that's Halloween H20. I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, it is the most straightforward since at least part 2, so it gives the characters a ton of time to be fleshed out and, despite their little quips and intricacies, feel like pretty real people. The return of Jamie Lee Curtis is obviously great and she turns in a solid performance, as do most of the cast members. Her relationship with John is handled well, and their mutual frustration feels really authentic. And I really liked Chris Duran's Michael Myers. He had the little bit of urgency that original Michael had that the Thorn trilogy was missing. The kills were okay. The ice skate to the face is fun, and we get another Michael holding someone up in the air, which is cool, I guess. The kill that stood out to me most was actually Sarah's. It felt the least hyperbolized, and actress Jodie O'Keefe really just seemed terrified and helpless in her final moments. This is definitely the slowest Halloween outside of the original, but I think that generally works in its favor. People who want Michael just hacking and slashing at this point will be disappointed, but I think it's worth the wait. It's also just the first in a while to feel like a complete movie with an ending, as opposed to a piece of a very convoluted puzzle. As I said before, I am not a big fan of movies that took a ton of influence from Scream. I love Scream itself, but the movies that try to mimic its humorous meta style just almost always fall flat for me. H2O is clearly in this realm, but aside from a few moments here and there, it luckily isn't too on the nose. All in all, H2O is a pretty standard but pretty solid slasher. Despite leaving Haddonfield, it captures more of that original feeling that parts 5 and 6 replaced with druids. I'm still not sure how I feel about the whole eliminating a whole bunch of sequels aspect of it. It's just not something you see very often. I get that the series was a hot mess, and I think if they left it at H2O, it would have been a good place to end the series, but of course they didn't leave it alone. It made money. And if there's one thing the Akkads and the Weinsteins have in common, it's that they love money. That's why we get fucking Halloween Resurrection. But before I look at that dumpster fire, I'll be covering a slasher I think everyone should actually watch. Next week we'll be watching a bizarre little movie called Sleepaway Camp. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and this has been Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Halloween H2O. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with my weekly horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.